Ready to start? I'm waiting for. Here we go. Okay, hello and welcome to the meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. We'll get straight on with the main items. But first of all, before we do, may I welcome Sarah Birch to her first meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee. You're very welcome, Sarah. Look forward to your contribution. Okay, moving on. Apologies for absence. I think we're all present and correct, unless Wendy corrects me. That's great. Third item, public open forum. Usual question, have any members of the public expressed an interest to address this committee, please, Wendy?
No members of the public, no. Chair.
Okay, good. In that case, let's move on to the action list. And this month I will get it correct. Okay, first action is in respect to John Davis. We're asking for an update on finance team capacity. I do note John's unable to attend the meeting because of workload pressures. So I'm content to carry this action forward to our next committee meeting in early December. The second action is in respect of the people strategy and asset management. That's on the agenda for next month. So yet again, I'm not going to ask for an update on that point. In a similar way, item 3 is respect of the complaints report. Yet again, that action will fall due when we next consider the complaints report. So yet again, let's not consider that action any further. Item 4, in a similar vein, that's in respect to the strategic risk register. Just to note that I'm meeting with Matt and I think Richard next week to talk about sort of, how we look to develop this item and make sure that's in a fit state for consideration at a meeting in December. Item 5 is in multiple parts. The first part is in respect of the training rates. I do note, as I did last month, that we had some information provided by Sean, which was helpful, and we did get a verbal update from Peter in terms of setting out how we are looking to evolve our sort of training software package. So I'm very content to close item A. I'm less content to close items B and C because I don't think we've had that information. I do understand if officers continue to experience high workload, but can I just check in with Peter in the first instance, Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Executive, where we are those actions at this stage, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think, having spoken to Rich Jones yesterday, and alongside, I think, other conversations that will ultimately naturally feed into and through the governance working group that I think we've referred to previously. But I think to the point that I think that your meeting with Richard and Matt has just highlighted in and around the paper that's looking to be brought into the next meeting. I've got a conversation with the two of them that they will be able to therefore then take into the conversation with yourself, Chair. And I think that's probably, because they are so closely aligned in terms of the strategic risk register and the arrangements around that, and obviously what is looking to be drawn out here by parts B and C of Action 5. So if you're content with that, I think that will therefore enable us to bring that all of that back through and into currently marked as an end of November meeting, but I think we're looking for an alternative date for that. So next meeting.
Great, thank you, Peter. Much appreciated. Yeah, that sounds sensible to me. And I'll just look for any contrary views. No, I think we're okay. Item 6 is an ongoing action in respect of, just a request for this committee to be kept abreast in terms of developments in respect of the service delivery the delivery model for the internal audit function. So yet again, I don't think there's any update at this stage, so we'll just keep it open and roll that forward. Item 7 is in respect of this committee's own self-assessment. In the pre-meet, directly preceding this meeting, we've talked about the status of that and what we're doing in terms of next steps, and I'll pick that up separately with members and officers as appropriate. So I'm content to close that action, please, Wendy. So it's action number 7. If I look at action 8, I do note that we received an email update on the situation, I think yesterday, so thank you for those involved in providing that information. So yet again, I'm happy to close action 8. And action 9, we had a base of constructive conversation on the self-assessment report. That is the council's self-assessment report at our last meeting. I think Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insight Manager, took away some actions. The action is marked as being proposed closed, beg your pardon. Can I just check in with Richard that those actions have been progressed, please?
Yeah, well, thank you to the committee again for that feedback. The report's been amended and is on the agenda for council next week in line with the legislation. So that's also public papers. No non-councillor members can also view it if they wish.
Great, thank you. In that case, we can close that action. Much appreciated. Okay, we can now get on to the body of this meeting. We're starting with item 5. Item 5 is the revised counter-fraud, corruption and bribery policy. Members should note we're being asked to review and endorse this policy if deemed appropriate. I understand that Jan Firek, our Chief Internal Auditor, will introduce the item. So Jan, please assume we have read the policy, but perhaps you could maybe highlight the policy's key elements, what the main changes are over the period, and then confirm what you are expecting this committee to do with that information, please.
Right, thank you, Chair. Yes, so this is a review of the Council's counter-fraud, corruption and bribery policy. So in line with best practice, this was approved by Cabinet last in June 2017. It should be periodically reviewed. So we note that it hasn't been reviewed for quite a while, so we will commit to doing a review every 3 years of this policy moving forward. So this has been a general refresh of the entire policy. There's some main areas of change to the previous approved statement. So in that is an inclusion of an executive summary. We've provided a definition of money laundering. We've included a table to hopefully highlight stakeholder-specific responsibilities within the framework. We've included a section detailing the Council's fraud response plan and included a flowchart for employees and members within Appendix 1 of what to do and what the Council's response would be in relation to any fraud allegations. And we've also included a do's and don'ts section as Appendix 2 for members and officers. So the revising and the updating of this policy will help Monmouthshire County Council to have the right organisational culture with regards to its counter-fraud arrangements. This is also on the back of a report completed by the Auditor General for Wales called Raising Our Game, Tackling Fraud in Wales, and a number of recommendations that the Auditor General raised for all councils to undertake. One of these is to ensure that appropriate levels of fraud awareness training is done across the organisation, both for members and officers. So this is a commitment that we will be offering following approval of this policy, which will become a mandatory training package for all officers and members of the council. We've also previously given a commitment to Governance and Audit Committee that an annual fraud risk assessment will be presented for consideration to the Governance and Audit Committee. Following implementation of this revised policy, we will look to bring back to committee a future report reviewing the current situation and the current position of the Council in compliance with this new policy, outlining a targeted programme of work and a risk assessment that we will then look to implement. So my ask of Governance and Audit Committee is that you endorse the revised counter-fraud, corruption and bribery policy before we pass over to Cabinet for approval. So I'm happy to answer any questions and have any comments on the policy.
Thank you, Jan. So questions or comments to Jan, please. Rodri.
Thanks for that, Jan. We previously talked about mandatory training and compliance rates in reference to GDPR being around 67%. So I just wanted to check. Obviously, this training is going to be mandatory and to check that there's going to be processes in place to ensure that we have full compliance.
Yes, there will be. So we will make sure that there's full compliance across the whole of the organisation, and that will be targeted training as well, whether it's delivered face-to-face or an online course as well, depending on the nature of the role.
Okay, great. Can I have a supplementary as well? Further in the policy, it says about you keeping a record of any complaints. I just wanted to check there is a process, obviously, to look for patterns of repeated allegations across the council.
Yes, that is an area that we will be looking to strengthen on the back of this policy. But yeah, we will be looking for obviously any patterns, any allegations relating to a certain service area, potentially certain individuals, just to make sure that it's not just a one-off and any repeat allegations are identified.
Okay, thank you. Go to Martin next, please. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things, if I may, Jan. Firstly, in the paper itself, there's a list of consultees in Power 6, which is a pretty short list. I would have thought Audit Wales would be probably on there, so I'd perhaps ask them for their views on this. And I wonder whether you've talked to colleagues in the other 21 local authorities about what their policies are, and why are we inventing our own wheel here? We're all in the same boat, aren't we? And secondly, if I may, in the paper itself, allied to something that Rodri just talked about in terms of training, there's a fabulous line in Power 7.2 which says there's going to be circulation of relevant information. Does that mean a comms plan to tell people this thing exists? A couple of things there for you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Yeah, so in terms of consultation, yeah, so we'll be taking that forward. So I can obviously liaise with the Audit Wales colleagues. In terms of policies across local authorities, I have, as part of this refresh, looked at the corresponding policies across Wales to make sure to see if there's anything that's being missed on our policy compared to other policies. So that has all been considered as part of it. And I am aware that from looking through other local authorities' policies that they are potentially out of date like ours was. So we have been looking at revising them. In terms of the second part then, in terms of like a comms plan, yeah, we obviously, as the policy is reviewed, we need to make sure that we've got this out across the organisation, both for employees and members, to make sure they're fully aware of the revised policy, and that's what obviously the training is going to hopefully encourage as well. But there will be a whole comms package going out as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colin, please.
Yes, it's interesting having Audit Wales in the meeting. I'm just about to quote them. But from their 2021 report, they identified that 95% of fraud identified was from 13 of the 22 councils. So I was wondering about Monmouthshire's awareness around that, and whether it would be, or whether you should consider to put into the policy that fraud is a fact of life and is ongoing externally and internally to a certain extent, and it's up to the policy and procedure to dynamically and innovatively look at those things on an ongoing basis. And obviously, because if you look at, say, the age of the policy, which we're looking at 6 years, fraud has obviously moved on considerably during that period of time, and there are different threats that we face from that period, and whether that sort of active acceptance of that pushing forward would help us in tackling fraud.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of the statistic provided then from Audit Wales, that's related to the National Fraud Initiative. So it's not to say that there isn't fraud in any of the other local authorities. Obviously, that's done on the NFI kind of snapshot. In terms of our compliance with the NFI, we've just completed our exercise for the last round of matches, and we didn't uncover very much fraud or very much instances of non-compliance with that. There was a couple that we have taken forward, but nothing really of warrant to note. Obviously, other local authorities might be bigger and might have higher payments coming out that could potentially encourage more fraud to take place. But obviously, it's not to say that there isn't fraud taking place in Monmouthshire. But obviously, the whole policy is to make sure that people are aware of what it looks like and how to report that in, and especially any concerns that if something doesn't feel right, they know who to speak to.
Yeah. If I could just have one more with that. With the whistleblowing policy around that, there's some talk now amongst the public sector that should be an independent board level member that receives that, rather than I'd suggest the more ad hoc approach that's sort of covered in the policy towards that. Would you say that that's something that the authority are going to consider?
I'd have to pass that over to colleagues in HR and governance team, because they're responsible for the whistleblowing policy. But as part of a whole review of the employee code of conduct, then that obviously needs to take place, and consider that in line with that and how best to report whistleblowing instances, because we want to make it as easy as possible to report any concerns, but obviously it needs to be at a sufficient level.
That's great, thank you.
So could I just come in there in terms of whistleblowing? So I think this committee has responsibility for overseeing the whistleblowing policy and arrangements, but I'm not aware if this committee's seen any information of that regard. So something I'd like you to consider, please, Jan. Thank you. But Peter, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I think in the way that Anne's just responded to the question, I think, and in terms of whether the responsibility lies, I guess, in terms of what would be, I guess, probably Sally Thomas in terms of HR manager. But I think there's probably an action with two parts there. One is in terms of providing sort of reflection and clarification back on to your point, and to the need to review and update the whistleblowing policy in that regard. The second one is, and you're right, it falls within the terms of reference to the committee, and I think you're fair to point out that that is something that needs to be forthcoming. I think maybe away from Jan, I'll maybe take that one. I think he's probably got enough on the agenda already today and by way of action, so I'll take that up with HR colleagues and follow that through and report back, no problem.
Okay, great, many thanks. Okay, let's move to Sarah, please.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, a lot has changed since 2017, the previous policy. Are we confident that we've got adequate consideration of the risks that arise from remote working? We've got people who've been working from home for several years now, and also the changing environment in terms of electronic frauds, email impersonation, email hacking, senior officer impersonation, and now the new opportunities that arise from AI. Have we got that changing risk environment fully covered, do you think?
Yeah, good question. I think in terms of Monmouthshire Council, obviously they were ahead of the time in terms of staff working from home. A lot of organisations had a big shock in 2020 when that became the norm, but Monmouthshire was doing it for a long time before that. So there are policies and procedures in place specifically for IT security, which obviously the IT and the digital team are a better place to answer those kind of questions. But yeah, I take your point in terms of fraud, that it does open up other avenues for fraud to take place, especially where employees are not specifically monitored like they would have been when they were in the office with a manager watching over them. But that's kind of the way a lot of organisations now are going down that route, and obviously we just need to be mindful. Obviously it's covered potentially through internal audit reviews, obviously management and management oversight of their particular teams as well, to make sure that there's no concerns, and then obviously they feed that back through as appropriate.
Thank you. Phil, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A lot of good points there. I'm pleased to see it being refreshed. We seem to be having a general refresh in the policies at the moment, and that's to be welcomed. The report asks us to endorse it. I'm happy to do that. And if you could just excuse me, I've got an urgent phone call. I've got to just nip out a minute.
Of course, no problems. Tony, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is based on the executive summary at the beginning, where it suggests the Auditor General for Wales thinks there could be anywhere between 100 million and £1 billion worth of losses, which is 0.7 or 7% of the annual Barnet formula to Wales. Yesterday, we saw the Welsh Government trying to save exactly that amount to compensate for the fact of these potential losses. I don't know what the Auditor General's views are, or his representative's views are, as to where that 100 million to £1 billion comes from, and what processes are in place to prevent it, and what is the biggest loss that's been identified, and has any of that lot been dragged back? It seems to me one hell of a lot.
So I think it is a lot of money. Perhaps, Rachel, could you come in there? Because am I correct in saying that you consider fraud risk when you review the annual accounts? And maybe you could say a few words about the extent of work you do in that regard, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do consider fraud risk in relation to the accounts. I suppose a reminder of what our audit opinion covers. So we cover, or we ensure that or provide assurance, I suppose, that the accounts are free from material error, be that due to, innocent error or fraud. We do specific work around the controls that could be manipulated by management. So management overrider controls, it's always a risk. In all our audits, it's a risk that we cannot rebut is present to all audited bodies. So, we look at specific areas that could be more susceptible to manipulation by officers. We also do have to do work around the risk of expenditure and revenue recognition, so manipulation of figures in that sense. I suppose there probably is a level of acceptance that, there will be fraud in organisations like local authorities. I suppose our focus is really on the materiality for the purposes of the accounts. We do just have regular conversations with internal audit to inform that risk assessment, whether they've been made aware of any instances of fraud. So I suppose there's a wide spectrum of fraud. There's, someone nicking 20 quid out of a petty cash pot to, very sophisticated schemes of collusion. So I suppose it's important to remember that when we're talking about, what our risk assessment is in terms of the accounts. We do provide the data matching sets for the National Fraud Initiative, which Jan has referred to, and it appears that Monash is doing pretty well on that front. I've got to be honest, I would need to go back and reread the report that came out, a couple of years ago now, in terms of the specifics around the Auditor General's comments there on those figures.
Can I come back on that, Chair? Yes, I'm concerned about the sort of loopholes that might exist in public sector bodies. For example, on the conception of when COVID came in, the national government chose to make grants of £5,000, I think it was £5,000 to certain companies. Now, some of the drug running companies had loads of accounts. They immediately jumped in and had their £5,000 and whizzed off. I think it was 100 million quid went missing. So are we really on top of loopholes which maybe now stare you in the face?
So, Tony, I think that question's more directed at officers as opposed to Audit Wales. And
just a thought.
It's a valid thought. But through this committee, we've had a number of assurances in respect of the arrangements, in respect of anti-fraud measures, money laundering, whistleblowing, etc., or indeed it will do in the near future. So I think it's up to us to ask the right questions of officers and to ensure that those items are included in our work programme.
Chair, my concern was the fact that it could be between 100 million and a billion. That seemed to be a very wide figure for the Auditor General to come up with. I thought there'd be more accuracy.
I think just to assist Councillor Eason, so I think the Raising the Game report that is referred to, I think, in the introduction to Jan's report, that's a 2020 report. I've just been tracking back myself. And that report itself refers to an earlier report in June 2019, from where that sort of broad estimate of £100 million to £1 billion is referred to. I think it's probably beneficial if I'm sure Rachel won't. No, I've got it. I've got the report. But I think it provides some narrative in terms of some of the guesstimates that are used in coming to those figures, which are based on some UK-wide estimates that have been captured. So I think if helpful, we can just maybe just circulate that for information and reference, and hopefully it will provide some clarification to you, Councillor Eason.
Great, thank you. Okay, Just one final point from me. So you've already talked about, Jan, that you are going to provide this committee with periodic updates on matters pertaining to this policy. Could I just ask you to work with Wendy to ensure that is then programmed into our forward work plan, please? That'd be great.
Yeah,
otherwise, unless there's any other comments, I think we are content to endorse this report. So well done. Thank you. Good update. Okay, let's move on to item 6. Item 6 is the Q1 update from Audit Wales. I think this is mainly for information, but if I hand over to Rachel Freitag and Charlotte Owen of Audit Wales to talk us through the key points and provide any updates as appropriate. So, Rachel, Charlotte, over to you, please.
Great, thank you, Chair. I think the first of 3 reports from us today, so apologies in advance. You're going to be hearing an awful lot from me for the next session. I guess firstly to point out that this is the update as at the end of June. I think due to summer holidays and paper deadlines, this is the earliest committee we were able to get this update to. We've actually recently circulated the September update to officers, so I'm sure that can be circulated more widely to members so you get a written update. But we will provide a verbal update on how things stand today. So I'll run through the financial audit aspects of this, and Charlotte can come in on the performance audit programme, if that's okay. So I can touch on the annual audit summary that was actually issued in March 2023, as indicated. The audit of the 22-23 financial statements of the council is ongoing. Unfortunately, we've had some staff departures internally, so we've had to reallocate some of our resources. So I guess as alluded to, potentially previously, we're now aiming for a January certification. This is a month earlier than we certified the last year's accounts, so still moving forward, but admittedly is disappointing on that front. The audit work on charities is due to commence later in November and into December to ensure completion before the Charity Commission deadline at the end of January. You'll see the audit plan for the Welsh Church Act is later on the agenda. Our certification of grant claims is ongoing. Our work on the NNDR, the National Non-Domestic Rates grant is nearing completion, and the teachers' pension work is underway. The aim of this is to complete these ahead of the November deadlines, and our audit of the remaining grants will commence shortly. We are using central teams this year to complete our grants work, separate to the teams of the main authority account audit, to try and complete those grant audits, I guess, more alongside the audits of the accounts to try and claw back some time. I will pass over to Charlotte now for the performance audit section, and then happy to take any questions at the end.
Thanks, Rachel. So in terms of the 22-23 performance audit work programme, the assurance and risk assessment work, the capital programme management review, we've issued the project brief to the council now. We're in the process of setting up field work. We're hoping to undertake that over the next couple of months. The use of performance information with a focus on service user feedback. The fieldwork for that is now completed, and the draft report is due to be issued to the council over the next couple of weeks. So that should hopefully make its way to you at the December committee meeting. Then the setting of wellbeing objectives, that work's now completed, and that report came to the last committee meeting. The unscheduled care review. The field work for that is now completed, and we will be starting to issue the reports to the different health boards from sort of this autumn onwards. I'm not sure at the moment of the specific date of the Aneurin Bevan one, but I will sort of find that out and circulate that around committee members. The digital review, the field work for that is now complete, and the report's being drafted, and we hope to issue the draft report to the council in early November. Then moving on to the 23-24 work programme, the assurance and risk assessment work is currently underway, and we're in the process of setting up some interviews to speak with members of the senior leadership team to inform that work. Then the remainder of the 23-24 work programme, so that's a thematic review on financial sustainability, on commissioning and contract management, and also a local review on performance management arrangements. Those are all being scoped at the moment, and that work will all take place in early 2024. Then in terms of the local government national studies, a few updates on the timing of those. So the planning for sustainable development, the governance of national parks, and the corporate joint committees reports are all due to be published November, December time. And the other update on that is they are currently scoping a review on homelessness. I think the rest of the update is probably less specific to Monmouthshire, so I won't run through that. There's updates from Estin, CIW, and then some national reports which have been published. But if this is circulated to members, and if you do have any questions, then come back to us on that sort of national stuff that I've not covered. But yeah, happy to take any questions on anything that me and Rachel have covered today. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Charlotte. So, questions and comments to Audit Wales, please. Nope, I think you got off lightly. Okay, so thank you for...
Sorry, Chair. I think Martin's got his hand up.
You are right, Martin.
The time it takes to press the little yellow hand is faster than you, Chair. So apologies for not jumping in there quick enough. A couple of things. I noticed that the report on the National Park Authorities is not going to be out until November. That's obviously of interest to us because we have a representative on the National Park Authority. But there's also starting now, when it's not mentioned in here, the Government Special Purpose Authorities for the Fire and Rescue Service as well. It's underway. And I'm kind of surprised the second one starts before the first one finishes. So no one's got a chance to learn from the first one to implement it to see it before the second one starts. That's kind of curious. That's a comment more than anything else. And the other comment, I guess, more on an observation is that really, I appreciate this is June, I guess, is the reason why. But Rachel, your comments around the accounts being not delivered by January, whereas clearly it says November in here, is indeed disappointing, as you said. It's helpful that when the documents are published, timelines and rationale for why the timelines are where they are would be really helpful. It was interesting to note that when we roll on to the grants audits, there is a line that says draft grant submissions were late, and it doesn't make any comment as to why or by how much. So hopefully when you write yours report here, you will say audits were late, and we all live by the same standards. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments, please? Peter Davis.
Slightly abusing things here in the question, but I think it's a point that'll be helpful to the committee anyway. So just two separate points. One, and they sit side by side. The financial sustainability thematic review, Charlotte. It's probably a conversation not just with me and you, just in terms of timing, but I guess that's equally applicable to the other 21 authorities as well. So noting where that's sort of looking to position itself, I'm assuming that there will be a conversation probably up with Society of Welsh Treasurers in terms of locating that in the right window so it doesn't sit in and amidst, the real pressure point of the budget, understanding the challenges that we're facing at the moment. And I guess a point linked to that, which is one around not just the field work being done, but for that piece of work to be added value benefit, for it to actually to make sure that that is closed out and reported back on a timely basis, if it is therefore going to have a benefit to obviously the budget process that then subsequently comes ahead of it. So that was the first point. The second one, just in terms of commissioning and contract management, it's probably just worthwhile to note, and it's maybe in your thoughts anyway, in terms of the collaboration that we're now in with Cardiff Council, Ardal, and the 4 local authorities. So just in terms of trying to drive some efficiency at a time when you are clearly under pressure with resources, it's maybe just to give some thought, I guess, in terms of, an approach that applies to 4 councils who are looking to align their procurement practices.
Okay, thank you.
Peter. So I'm just going to sort of come back quickly. I know in terms of the financial sustainability, there are plans to talk to the Treasurers Group again, so hopefully you'll have the opportunity to feed in through that. At the moment, I believe the timing of the review is likely to be after the budgets are agreed, so probably the first quarter of 23-24, which will hopefully be good in terms of not coming in at a very, very busy time for you, but also if we're timely in our reporting, that will help feed into the following year's sort of early budget process as well. Then in terms of the commissioning and contract management, I'm not aware at the moment what the scope of that is, but I'll certainly feed in those comments about those councils who are sort of working together and see how that can be involved in the scope. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Charlotte. Much appreciated. Okay, I suggest we move on to item 7. Item 7 is an update on the Council's progress against the Audit Wales work programme up until this month. So for handover the handover to Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insight Manager, to talk us through the paper. So Richard.
Thanks, Chair. And so I'll hand over to Hannah to introduce the report. She's collated it.
Okay, great.
Thank you. So each year, Audit Wales produce an audit plan which sets out the work they intend to undertake to discharge their duties around assessing value for money and implementing the Sustainable Development Principle. And so the purpose of this report is to provide the committee with an update on the Council's progress against the Audit Wales work programme up to October, so that the committee can assure itself of the progress of the Council's response. So in the report, it provides an update on the progress being made by the Council in implementing the findings of Audit Wales local reviews. So this includes an update on progress against existing local reviews and then also any additional local reviews that have been conducted. Recommendations that require further attention marked as open. Where a recommendation has been assessed as being adequately addressed is then marked as closed. As well as the local reviews, each council, Audit Wales also carry out national studies across all councils in Wales. And though these may not always be specific or completely pertinent to Monmouthshire, we do share these reviews with service areas and do provide a management response to these reports also. So in the report itself, in Appendix 1, you'll find the Open Audit Wales proposals for improvement. So these are the local reviews, and you will find the progress so far being made against these recommendations. So in here you'll find a financial sustainability assessment, and then also a review into workforce and asset management. And then you'll also find in Appendix 2 the responses to the national review. So there's only been 2, I believe, national reviews, a building safety in Wales national review and the recommendations and response to those. And then you'll also find the Spring Forward National Review, which is a summary of Audit Wales's findings in conducting their workforce and asset management work. And so we have provided a management response to this, but members are asked to refer to Appendix 1 to find progress being made against the specific recommendations in this local report in Monmouthshire. So members are asked to use this report to scrutinise the Council's response to the Audit Wales work programme and to seek assurance that adequate progress is being made. And members can also refer any issues contained within the national studies to relevant committees for further scrutiny if they feel that is needed.
Great, thank you, very helpful. So questions and comments, please. Okay, maybe just a comment from me. For me, the most material point is respect of the financial sustainability, and clearly, like all public sector organisations, this council is facing some significant financial challenges, and I do recognise officers are working very hard and diligently to close the in-year deficit in this year's budget. And also as well, putting a huge amount of work into producing the budget for next year, as well as the outer years. Nonetheless, my observation is that this committee has had to date relatively little visibility in terms of the work being progressed and the governance arrangements in place to ensure that the closure of that in-year budget deficit and the work undertaken to develop the budget for next year as to what those arrangements are. I'll ask Peter Davis to comment in a minute, but we had a pre-meet a week or two ago, and Peter Davis has offered to provide this committee with an update next month in terms of setting out the work being progressed, to give this committee visibility over that work, and also have confidence in terms of the robustness of that exercise. That's my comment. Peter, could you come in there just to confirm that's the case, or indeed maybe more eloquently explain what we've agreed?
No, I think that's a very fair description. I think it's just worthwhile highlighting, I think, probably two key reports that will be making their way through to Cabinet in the coming cycle or two, one of which is the month 5 report, which will contain within it the work around the budget recovery plan. To your point, Chair, I think probably append that or sit that report behind, I think, an update which probably more centres itself with the responsibilities of the committee to assure itself around I guess the robustness of arrangements that clearly we've put in and overlaid beyond what is normal to assure ourselves, I guess, of bringing the in-year position back in balance by the end of the year. So that's number one. And then secondly, which will be the budget process and timetable report. Currently in discussion at the minute in terms of the timings, just in terms of being able to manage all of the workload pressures all at once. It's currently scheduled at the same time to go into the Cabinet meeting on the 8th of November, but that may be subject to change just to make sure that we get the sequencing of update right. But regardless, the month 5 and budget recovery will be going to the 8th of November Cabinet. Furthermore, and just in terms of bringing two associated things together, the next meeting will also be used as a means by which to seek the committee's views on the council's financial strategy, which will be going into council in December. So I think it's probably worthwhile. I'll maybe consider as to whether that gets captured within one holistic report, or whether it better serves itself through two reports. One for dealing with the in-year as much as one to deal with the robustness of the budget process and around the financial strategy. So, but yes, you're right, Chair. Those are substantive matters for the committee to look over at the next meeting.
Great, thank you, Peter. Helpful as always. If I could turn to Martin, please.
Thank you, Chair. One of the Audit Wales reports refers to cracks in the foundations, which follow on from Grenfell. How doesn't building tragedies move from time to time now? We're into RAC now, aren't we? We've moved on, so it seems. I wonder whether, again, using this as a hook to ask the question, have we done a survey of our schools and premises around RAC, and whether Audit Wales are going to be doing any work on it, or whether we are doing any work on it? Because I'm aware close to home, mostly Neville Hall has been found to be subject to this area. So I just wonder whether our schools fall into this category particularly.
Thanks, Martin. Happy to provide a response on this, and equally to give some levels of comfort and reassurance. I think Welsh Government, as a consequence of, I guess, what played out obviously in recent times in England, and obviously gave rise and cause for I guess a heightened level of interest and review and assurance around that issue with RAC. So with our school estate and through some initial timescales that we worked with Welsh Government on, as did other 21 authorities, we've gone through the necessary steps to sort of review and update our information, and I think we made the public statement anyway through our website and otherwise to confirm that we have no schools that fall into that bracket, which is really good to hear. And we'd had to do some further detailed survey work just to confirm that fact. With regards to non-schools, the initial across-the-top assessment has not identified any that is clearly highlighted RAC present. However, as is the case in other councils across Wales, there is, I guess, a short list of buildings where, similar to schools, you want that level of absolute assurance. And I think there's a small number of buildings that, again, are going to have further survey work undertaken just to get absolute peace of mind. But no concerns to raise here, which is similar to updates we provided either to FOIs, of which we have had many, as much as to statements we've made publicly. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Peter. Okay, so I think we can note those updates and take comfort from the good work being done to progress those matters. So thank you, one and all. We'll now move on to item 8. Item 8 is the certification of grant returns for 21-22. I'll hand back to Rachel Freitag to quickly talk us through the report, please.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'll take the report as read and just focus on some of the highlights, but happy to take questions at the end. So I can now confirm that we've completed all of our grant certification work in relation to 21-22. The last claim to be certified was the housing benefit claim, which I believe was done last month. Unfortunately, we weren't able to complete all of the work before our focus as an organisation turned on to our NHS audit, central government, local government work. So there was a little bit of work outstanding. It's a very factual report, but we've certified 5 returns and we've issued 1 qualification. This is compared with 4 qualifications last year, so I think it's pleasing progress for the authority in terms of some of those controls and tightening things up. The qualification related to the NNDR return, national non-domestic rates, and related to a lack of inspections on properties to confirm eligibility for empty property relief. I should state Monmouthshire are not alone in having a qualification of this nature. I think it is a bit of a throwback and a bit of a hangover of the pandemic and getting into properties and catching up on that work. For housing benefit, we raised a number of observations to DWP relating largely to documentation available. Other forms of evidence were available for us to be able to conclude our work in most cases, but I suppose the best practice, I suppose, if you like, documentation wasn't available. And the pooled budget required a small amendment, but amending the return meant that no qualification was required. Turning then to the fee, the reduced number of issues this year is reflected in the lower fee to be charged for the 21-22 work. And for 22-23, I am estimating a lower fee again. This is due largely to the fact that we didn't identify any issues in the housing benefit testing that will require follow-up testing. So this year, we were required to follow up on issues that we'd identified in the 2021 certification work. Because we didn't identify anything in 21-22, we haven't got that base level of follow-up work to do. As ever, though, I should stress this is only ever an estimate, and we're required under statute to charge what it costs us to complete the work. I'll stop there and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Questions or comments? Martin.
Well, I'll ask the question I hinted at last time.
Oh, yes, apologies. Yeah.
How late was late?
I think some were a couple of days late, and I think others were probably a month or two. What I should stress is we don't ever plan to do our audit work until after we've finished the audit of the annual accounts, because we do it based on when the deadline for the certification is. So I suppose we weren't asking for those grant returns around those deadlines. They should be submitted to us. But it doesn't cause any issues in terms of our certification, and it doesn't cause any issues in terms of, you receiving the subsidy. I suppose it is an administrative fact. So I've not got any major concerns over those delayed returns. But I can go away and come back with the actual dates for you if it would be helpful.
It feels significant because it gets mentioned twice. It's on page 4 and then again on page 6. So I figured it was significant. If it's not, then perhaps it needs to be mentioned a little bit less. Okay, thank you.
Okay, fine.
Okay, thank you. Notwithstanding Martin's point, which is of course valid, it looks a much improved position in terms of most of the accounts are unqualified, big grant claims unqualified, so that's a better position than previous years, as you've highlighted, Rachel. So on that basis, I think we can note that paper. Many thanks. Let's move on to your final paper then, Rachel, which is item 9. That's the Council's Welsh Church Fund Act detailed audit plan. So back to you, Rachel.
Great, thank you, Chair. So this report is very similar to the audit plan that you'll have seen for the main authority statement of accounts. These are much smaller accounts. We've got a much lower materiality threshold as a result, sort of in relation to the size and the nature of the body. So it's the audit plan for the Welsh Church Act Fund. Our materiality threshold is 58 or around about £58,000. The exception to this is the materiality for related party transactions because of the nature and I guess public interest in those sorts of transactions. We set a materiality threshold of £5,000 on those, which means if there's an error identified above that value, we would qualify the accounts if not amended. So the only risk identified relates to the non-rebuttable risk of management override and is present in all organisations. Our planning work to date hasn't identified any other significant risks that we feel the need to draw to your attention. As noted earlier in the quarterly update, we're aiming to complete the audit in line with the Charity Commission's January deadline. Work will be kicking off on this over the next month or so. I think in November and December, I think I've got staff lined up to complete this work. And I'm sure you will have noticed the increase in fee of 20%. 15% of this relates to this year's increase relating to pay inflation and the introduction of the revised ISO 315 auditing standard. And this increase is in line with the increase of all of our local government bodies. And the remaining 5% is I've got to hold my hands up. There was an error in last year's plan where a planned increase wasn't communicated to you, so we honoured the fee in the plan last year. But it does mean that you're getting, I guess, a double whammy of increase this year. So I just wanted to, I guess, put that on the table and highlight it to you. But again, as I've mentioned, under statute, we charge what it costs us rather, to complete the audit. So if it costs us less than anticipated, we would charge you less. Again, happy to take any questions because I appreciate that was a very quick canter through as I'm conscious of time and you're probably all getting a bit sick of listening to me.
No, thank you, Rachel. Let's check members. Questions or comments, please? No, I think we're good. So I think this is largely information. You've set out the plan very clearly. It looks reasonable. So on that basis, we do note it. So thank you, Rachel. Much appreciated.
Great. Thanks all.
Okay, we'll now move on to item 10. Item 10 is the Contract Procedure Rules Exemptions paper. This has been introduced by Jan Furek, our Chief Internal Auditor. Yet again, Jan, please assume we've read the paper, but please feel free to draw out the matters of note and any updates since this paper was published.
Right, thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of this paper is to consider the adequacy and appropriateness of the exemption process from the authority's contract procedure rules and to inform the committee of the number of exemptions requested by managers and to potentially identify any non-compliance or any adverse trends. So first of all, it's noting that the previous report regarding CPR exemptions was presented to Governance and Audit Committee back in July 21, so we acknowledge that this report is overdue. We will make a commitment to making sure that this report is now provided on a 6-monthly basis as part of the Forward Work Programme. So the report in front of you covers the period from November 21 through to the current financial year and the first 6 months which ended end of September. We are currently in discussion with colleagues from Procurement and Digital Services regarding strengthening the whole CPR exemption process and offering a digital solution to the recording and approving of requests. There's also a number of potential legislative changes being discussed by UK Parliament and at the Senedd, which may result in the Council's overall contract procedure rules requiring updates within the next 12 months. So contract procedure rules, they're written to ensure a consistent and fair approach is completed for how officers procure works, goods and services on behalf of the Council, but there will always be occasions where compliance may not be appropriate or may not be possible. So the whole exemption process is to provide sufficient justification and appropriate approval where officers are not able to follow the rules within the policy. So within Appendix 3 to 5 of the report is a list of the exemptions which have been requested. So it's acknowledged that there's some missing data within this, within those appendices. So that's where exemption forms have been requested from internal audit, but they haven't been submitted as being approved by the respective head of service or chief officer. So at the present time, in the report it says there were 23 outstanding. That has now moved to 17. And where exemptions have not been provided, there can be many reasons why. So that could be that the exemption was requested from audit, or the paperwork was requested from audit, but ultimately that was not needed by service managers, but they just haven't told us to be able to close that loop off. Otherwise, it could be that the process has not been followed. We are currently completing an exercise to capture this missing information, and which is currently in progress, hence why the number of outstanding exemptions has gone down from 23 to 17 as it is currently. So we will continue to chase those up, and as part of that we will be reminding all heads of service and chief officers as to the correct procedure to follow when seeking an exemption from the Council's procedure rules. So as I mentioned, so Appendix 3 to 6 details a summary of all the exemptions requested and the current status and the reasons why those exemptions were approved by the relevant head of service. So happy to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Great, many thanks. In which case I'll turn to Tony in the first instance. Tony.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jan. An old chestnut which comes to this committee, has done since before we took on the job, was the communities in place, or public transport particularly. There's always been an issue of exemptions where the transport unit have got to go out and buy a bus. They've got to make a decision sort of there and then. That doesn't go through the contract procedures. There's quite a few of them on here, but there's been no... This was last year. They've now come up without any figures at all. A new bus was bought, a second-hand bus was bought, a minibus was bought. Why haven't we got any figures on there? I can understand the situation because they go to auction generally and they've got to make an instant decision, and that's got to be covered later. You can't get a contract procedure in for that. But we've got no figures there. Why have we got no figures for the cost of a new bus, a second-hand bus, or second-hand minibuses? Thank you.
Yeah, so as I said, that's where the paperwork has not been submitted back into internal audit. So when they've requested an initial, they've saying they're going to go to an auction to buy a new bus, we'll give them an exemption number, but then they have to complete that form, which would then tell us how much they've spent, the reason for the exemption, and the appropriate approval for that exemption. That part of the process hasn't taken place. So obviously once we get the forms back in from those relevant departments, we can update the costing element of that, of the spreadsheet then.
Well, this has been a criticism of the committee as well, that hasn't been given. We said there should be encouragement to make sure it is given, yet it isn't being given still, so they're not listening to our committee.
Thank you, Tony. Rodri, please.
Thanks. Jan, in 5.5 you talk about the exemption forms. So I just wanted to check, are there escalation process you could implement to ensure that people are responding to reminders? Because obviously you highlight the issues you've had in terms of staffing, but also wanted your perspective, an opinion on whether the consequences, is there a strong enough enforcement arm to ensure that people are responding when they should be to these notices?
Yeah, so in terms of the escalation, so I sent out an email a couple of weeks ago chasing up the outstanding exemption request that we had on our spreadsheet. The chief executive has got involved in that and has gone over that email to reiterate the importance of sound financial management and getting the information back to us, hence why there's been a considerable improvement in the forms that have been received. in terms of making sure the process has been followed, this is why we're moving to the digital solution, because there can't be that excuse then of the process hasn't been followed. It's all done through a digital app that will log that approval process as well. So at the moment, it's all done on paper-based forms, obviously flying about through different email addresses, which obviously can be missed to send that to internal audit at the final end of the process. Hence why we're moving to that digital solution. And obviously on the back of that, then we can look to put any sanctions in place if people are still not following the new process.
Okay, thank you for that. I suppose two comments from me, comments as opposed to questions. In paragraph 5.6, you draw attention to the fact that this process only captures the exemptions which have been requested via and returned to internal audit. So there's the risk that this list is incomplete. Clearly, we have no view at this stage in terms of how material that comment is. And secondly, and I've talked about this to Jan offline, I'm not comfortable that internal audits are apparently part of the control system in relation to this matter. So it's something I've asked Jan to think about in terms of considering in the context of Freeland's assurance model, whether his continuing involvement in this process in the way set out in this paper it continues to be appropriate. I do note Martin's raised his hand, so I'll go to Martin before concluding this matter.
Absolutely, Chair. To fully echo those comments, this is a procurement process, not an internal audit process, and it should be managed by procurement. That's of concern. The reasons for exemption, by and large, the two largest ones are the whatever it is 5B2, which is single tender action, and then 39C, which says extend the original circumstances in exceptional circumstances. I would struggle on the information we've been given to see how some of these things are a single tender action. Buying a van is not a single tender action. A number of these things are not, clearly not. I mean, it's bizarre. And I wonder whether a lack of planning sometimes is the reason why we're doing a single tender action, because we have to, or heck, the maintenance contract's lapsed, we need to get something in place. That should not be a reasonable excuse, and some more honesty, I think, in terms of the detail would be helpful to understand why so many single tender actions are dealt with. It's quite strange, and there's lots of vehicles in here, and then lots of extensions of contracts of some substantial amounts of money, which are contracts which have been extended for review, etc. And there are potentially hundreds of thousands. I haven't added them up, but I'm suspecting there's probably 1 million or more in here. I can't really be assured that this is best value for money, because clearly, if you're not testing the markets, you're missing the opportunity to see if there is a better deal out there. Some of it proprietary, I understand, but most of these I don't think are.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Yeah, so in terms of that, this is where we're moving to this digital solution to try and negate some of that somewhat, because obviously at the moment, the forms only come back to internal audit after it had been approved by the relevant head of service or chief officer. Obviously, procurement are involved within the process early doors. The new process will be that procurement will comment on that process. It will then come to internal audit. We will also comment. We will not provide an approval. We will not provide a yes or a no to it. We will provide our comments as to if the report attached to the exemption request is justified and justifies, like you said, it could be last minute expenditure. Have they set out a timeline as to why it might be last minute expenditure? Could it have been done any sooner? We will provide our comments back, not a yes or a no, but a comment, and then that will be to the relevant chief officer or head of service to then decide yes or no and whether to approve it or not. But we can look at amending our reports then to highlight instances in the future where internal audit or procurement have not necessarily agreed with the request for exemption, but it still has been approved. And that's what we can look at doing once we've launched this new digitised system. Okay, thank you for that. I'm not seeing any
other sort of questions being raised. So in terms of concluding this item, I think we can note the paper. I do feel slightly uncomfortable in respect of whether we actually are able to agree the recommendation set out at 2.1, in that this committee accepts and acknowledges the justifications, which it really sort of plays into the point Martin's just raised. So I think this committee can note the paper and look forward to improvements in the process in due course. Okay, if we could then move on to item 11. Item 11 is the usual quarterly update from internal audit. So I'll hand back to Jan yet again. Please assume we've read the paper. Paper looks very good. You've noted some positive progress, but please, over to you to highlight matters of note.
Right, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I'll just go through the paper and just highlight some areas of note. So just first of all, just to confirm the changes to the composition of the internal audit team that occurred during Q2. So it's pleasing to report that after the successful recruitment exercise, a new senior auditor joined the team midway through the quarter, so that was in August. We're currently using an external audit provider called Swap, who have been engaged by the council to conduct a small number of audit reviews. So at the plan stage, that was 4. That was funded by vacancy savings arising from the vacant chief internal auditor post and 5 months vacancy period for the senior auditor. However, as of the end of Q2, 2 of these reviews have commenced. However, due to the current budget situation, the money and budget set aside to cover the other 2 reviews may need to be offered up as a saving. But I'm comfortable with that proposal and I do not feel it will impact on my ability to issue an overall year-end opinion because we will maintain sufficient coverage across the council. So I want to bring to attention of Governance and Audit Committee 2 unfavourable audit opinions which have been issued during Q2. First one of them is Chepstow School, where we issued a limited assurance opinion. So the detail as to why we come to that conclusion is included within Appendix 4 with a list of the issues raised. I just want to highlight that it's important to note that it was the head teacher of that school who contacted myself during the summer term of 23 with concerns that they had regarding some of the financial practices at the school, and they specifically requested an audit review to be undertaken. So it's obviously pleasing. It's not pleasing to note that we've issued a limited assurance opinion, but it was pleasing that the head teacher came forward with concerns that they actually had at the school. The other unfavourable audit opinion is in relation to the pupil development grant. We've issued a qualified audit opinion for that grant, and the reason for that was a lack of response to requests for information from the sampled schools. So as I've detailed in section 5 of the report, in relation to the action short of strike at schools, so myself, Pete, the Deputy Chief Executive, and the Chief Officer for Children and Young People have met with representatives from the National Association of Head Teachers between July and September 23 in relation to the action short of strike. The NAHT have agreed that they will no longer be advising members not to engage with internal audit, but that's only in relation to a typical school audit review. So as we did at Chepstow School, they are not going to be restricting our work. However, for other audit reviews included in our 23-24 annual plan, we will need documentation and or explanations from schools. So for instance, the Regional School Improvement Grant, Pupil Development Grant, and other audit reviews such as additional learning needs. In these instances, the NAHT have said they will continue to advise members not to engage with internal audit. I have reminded the NAHT that internal audit is a statutory function of the council, and the regulations mean that all officers of the council, which include head teachers, should make available such documentation and other records as appear to that body to be necessary for the purposes of an audit, and to provide information and explanation that the body considers necessary for that purpose. So I will continue to make the request from schools in relation to these reviews, and I'll report back to the committee accordingly for schools who refuse to engage, hence why I've then given a qualified audit opinion for the pupil development grant. In terms of other work that we've been involved with over the quarter, so one special investigation commenced during Q1. This was finalised during Q2, and the matter was dealt with in accordance with the council's disciplinary policy. One unplanned review commenced during Q2. This was a review of all till floats issued across the council, and to ensure that the amounts held on site balance the official records held on the financial management system. And this work was currently ongoing at the end of Q2. Overall, it's pleasing to say that 36% of the annual audit plan had been completed by the 30th of September. So that's ahead of our profile target of 30% and was an improvement on last year's performance, which was at 28%. In terms of follow-up reviews, so during Q2, we issued a follow-up report for Tintern Old Station for our work which commenced in June 23. The draft report was issued in September with an improved opinion rating of reasonable assurance. So obviously that's pleasing to note, and that report is currently in the process of being finalised. We've also issued the final report for Castle Park Primary School, which has been issued with a substantial audit opinion. We have one follow-up audit which is still outstanding, which relates to Our Lady and St Michael's RC School, and we envisage that follow-up exercise will take place towards the end of Q3 or during Q4 this year. So in Appendix 1 of the report is our annual stats, which detail the opinions that we've issued during the quarter. And as I mentioned, in Appendix 4 is a list of the issues that we have raised at Chepstow School. So happy to answer any questions from committee.
Great, thank you. Very comprehensive. I'll turn to Phil first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And sorry, I had to dash off, but I've solved the problem now. Chepstow School, I'm pleased that the head brought this up, but this is an ongoing and historical issue at the school, partially due to the fact that it hasn't got enough pupils to sustain itself, but the ongoing problems there are obviously not making life easier. We've been looking at Chepstow School for many, many years now to try and get it right. So what sort of programme have we got, Jan, for trying to get to the well, hopefully the end of this problem, but certainly curtailing it?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. So in terms of moving this forward now, so we've myself and Nikki Wellington, the school's finance manager, we've met with the head teacher and their new business manager. We finalised the report. We've got a list of agreed management actions and implementation dates, which they are going to be taking forward. Nikki has been working with the school, especially around the budget situation, to ensure that that has been agreed and that it's sustainable moving forward. So those discussions are still ongoing. In terms of our follow-up work then, so within a 6 to 12 month period, so next financial year, we'll look to do a follow-up audit review of Chepstow School, where hopefully we can see improvements have been made and issue a revised opinion. In terms of the issues specifically raised within the audit, in terms of the critical weakness regarding the budget deficit position, it's pleasing to note that that has now, obviously the budget deficit hasn't been solved, but they now do have an agreed budget out at the school, so that was agreed last week. So obviously they are moving forward with that, and they do have a plan in place for how they can reduce the deficit moving forward.
Okay, well that's good to hear. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you. Sarah, please.
Just to ask whether the results and opinion from audits on schools are reported direct to governors as well as to their teacher.
Yeah, so in terms of our process out of school, so our draft report will be issued directly to the head teacher. Once we've got agreement on the draft report, then a copy of that report will be issued to the Chair of Governors as final, along with the head teacher and the Chief Officer for Children and Young People Services. And we do make it clear within that issuing of that report that they should bring that report to a future meeting of the governing body to make sure governors are fully aware of it and the content.
Thanks.
Great. Tony, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My yam keeps disappearing. I say it again now. Two questions, Jan. When will the report on Tintern Station be available to members? Which is a simple question. The second question is, I've lost it. I haven't lost it, but I lost the page. 5.4. The audit team will continue to make requests from schools and will report back to the committee according to those schools who refuse to engage. What does that mean to this committee? What teeth do we have? And basically, what does it mean for us as a committee?
Okay, I'll pick up Tintern first.
Yeah.
So in terms of reporting back, it's up to the committee to decide what information you want back. I've reported that we've got an improved opinion. If you want a list of anything that's outstanding, then I can bring you back a list of areas that we think still need improvement with it, Tintin. But under normal circumstances, the committee take assurance that we've issued that approved opinion, and they're no longer in the limited or unfavourable category now. But obviously I can take the steer from committee.
I'd like to know why you were there. I'd like to know why you were there in the first place. Why you investigating? So
I believe the reasons for the original limited audit opinion would have been considered by audit committee a couple of cycles ago. So I'd have to double check back through papers, but it should have gone through as a unfavourable opinion.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure, and Jan, I'm sure will check, but that would have been as part of a routine audit rather than a special, for example. So it's to the extent that, and to your point, a limited audit opinion would have been identified as a result of previous audit work, and obviously the improvements have subsequently been made.
Perhaps I can speak to Jan. What does that paragraph really mean?
Yeah, so obviously, as I've said, I'll continue to request from schools the information that I need and my team need to be able to complete our work and complete our audit plan. It's then up to committee, really, of how you want me to report back into you. I can say what reviews are being impacted by the action shorter strike. I can give you names of schools. I can give you names of head teachers, potentially. And the committee then can kind of do as they see fit in terms of taking that further forward. Obviously, you've got the ultimate ability to be able to call in employees of the council if that's the decision that you see fit. We're trying to work with head teachers to try and get that information to be able to do our audit work. Hence why when we did the Regional School Improvement Grant, the head teachers that we contacted for that particular grant provided the sufficient information, so we were able to certify the grant and say that it was unqualified. Obviously, we weren't in that position with the pupil development grant, but that was a different sample of schools.
Yeah, I was leading up to the point of calling in. Who would we call in if we needed to call anybody in? What level of management would we call in if we needed to call it in? Because it comes to this committee.
Yeah, it's probably why Jan's pausing as well.
We have called it in before.
Yeah, it's. I think as Jan has explained, this is a delicate situation. I think as you can well understand, and we're trying to be pragmatic, I guess, in the negotiations and the discussions that we're having. It's probably not landed exactly where we would want it to be, but the ability, I guess, to influence further than we have is difficult, I would suggest, and to that extent, and as you're drawing conclusions on various audits where you're not getting everything that you need, then you're obviously taking those positions around judgments and opinions, aren't you? That's not necessarily answering your question, but I'm not seeing an easy way through, I guess.
Well, it doesn't really ask the question, but it just suggests to me that paragraph is so open-ended that I just wonder if they should be there. Because I know our abilities to call people in. Who would we call in? Would it be teachers, head teachers, leaders? I don't know. I felt the paragraph itself is a bit very open-ended. Doesn't tell us anything, but it does leave a lot of questions.
Well, I think back to my point, I think Jan will and has obviously drawn opinions based on the information that he's been able to derive from audit work, and that's right and proper. And the unions have been made clearly aware of that. I'm not saying it's futile, but to the extent that you may find in asking a head teacher to actually come, that they're equally with the action shorter strike, that they'll won't look to attend anyway on that basis, and the unions will support them in that. So
Well, I think I'm the only one here who's been involved in other yourselves and a call-in in the past where you had transport people in, we actually grilled them and not what, and it's gone away with a successful conclusion. But this just seemed a bit odd to me, that's all.
So, Tony, it's a fair point. Could we leave to officers to take this offline and maybe come back as appropriate? Yeah, indeed. You know, clearly it's a very delicate matter, as Peter's outlined, so we need to tread carefully. But your point is well made. Peter. I'm sorry, Peter. Is your microphone on?
Right, my apologies. Just backing up really what you said, Chair, I can see why Jan has an obligation to include a paragraph like that, because he needs to tell us why certain audits might not have been completed. But going any farther than that, particularly in what is a public meeting after all, would very much risk inflaming a difficult situation. That's all I really want to say on that.
Yeah, just one thing, that if, for example, I suggested we call them in and Roddy supported me, we'd have to call them in.
Agree, but let the officers take this offline and come back to me as appropriate. It's a valid point. We do have that right, but we should use it wisely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on then. Move on to item 12, which is the forward work plan. I'm content with it, noting that I've asked Jan previously to work with Wendy to tweak that work plan to include a couple of items covered during the course of this meeting. But is there any other comment on that work plan, please? No? Okay. Item 13 is to confirm the minutes of our last meeting. I'm not going to turn the pages. As usual, the minutes are to a very high standard. I've had the opportunity to review them and make some tweaks myself, but I'll look to members for any comments on matters arising. Otherwise,
happy to approve, Chair.
Great. Okay, on that basis, we approve. Many thanks. And the final item is to note the date for next meeting. The date for the next meeting is 4th of December, not 23rd of November, as indicated on our agenda. So 4th of December, which I think is a Monday, 2 p.m. May I say thank you one and all for attending, and I wish you well. Look forward to seeing you in December. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.